And we took a business that was, they did about 25 trucks in 2020, 44 trucks in 21. We did about 80 trucks in 22. And then last year, 23, we did about 100 to 104, depending how you want to break it down. We got 125 this year and become the largest restorer of classic trucks in the country.
Man, that's incredible. Today we have Jeremy Hans. Now, Jeremy is a prior Navy pilot. He was an instructor out in Pensacola. Then he went off to go found Klein Capital, which he was a partner in, and now is an executive at a Velocity Restorations is the name of the company. I just got to catch up on his story. It is crazy. I'm really excited to dive into it. Welcome to the Zeroed In Podcast. I'm your host, John Lallande, a seasoned real estate investment expert and former Marine recon sniper. This podcast is designed for those seeking effective strategies to increase revenue growth through strategic hiring, leadership, and effective tracking. Our focus here is clear and direct. We provide actionable insights from successful founders and growth experts. Whether you're establishing a new business or aiming to scale an existing one, our episodes offer the essential advice you need for practical business growth. Lock and load, zero in, and get ready to scale. Welcome to the Zeroed In Podcast. Today we have Jeremy Hans. Now, Jeremy is a prior Navy pilot. He was an instructor out in Pensacola. I just got to catch up on his story. It is crazy. I'm really excited to dive into it. Then he went off to go found Klein Capital, which he was a partner in, and now is an executive at a Velocity Restorations is the name of the company. But it's a company, if you guys look it up, does some really cool things with restoring, looks like old Ford Broncos, old Ford classic trucks and things like that. So really excited to dive in. Jeremy, thanks for being on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nothing better than talking about yourself, right? So
exactly. And two veterans getting the shit talk, right? So why don't you just start out? I like how you kind of summed up your story from being in the military, kind of bumping shoulders with the right people, and that led you to where you are now with over 100 employees at a company restoring trucks. So can you kind of walk me through that journey?
Yeah. So sometimes it's sustained superior timing is what we say in the Navy. As an officer, right, for promotion. I think the same thing applies right now for me in my business and real estate career. So Jeremy got an ROTC scholarship for the Navy after I graduated, and so I was they must have had a couple extra. They threw it to some middle class white kids that were slightly chubby, and I guess I was one of them. And it happened to be to the school I was already going to. So I went to the University of Oklahoma and graduated there in 2007. Thankfully, good experience, played a lot of Xbox, chased girls, whatever, had fun, very little actual value in my life. But joined the Navy to go be a pilot. And then when I was doing that, I had a huge weight. And so my kind of story always starts off with how to do it wrong. And so in 2007, I took the career starter loan from both USA and Navy Federal and invested all in the stock market in 2007 and late 2007, early 2008. If you know anything about the history of the stock market, it crashed. And I turned $55,000 as a 23-year-old down to about 10 grand with nothing to show for it, but $1,000 a month loan payment and a recognition that I'm an idiot and I shouldn't try to beat billionaires at their own game. And I need to do something different. And so did the Navy thing, deployed multiple times on the John C. Stennis, an aircraft carrier, flying MH-60s out of San Diego. And I realized on that first deployment that the Navy was probably not for me long term, at least on active duty. I noticed hey, the more successful I was, the more work they gave me. And I was getting paid the same as the guy, sitting two seats over that was kind of like a lump on a log. I was like, this doesn't sit right with me, right? Something in my soul that didn't sit right there. And so I knew I was probably kind of short time in there. I was going to do my time and then do something else. Stayed in a lot longer than expected through the reserves. And at the same time, I bought, very fortunately, a fourplex in San Diego after I moved out there and did this thing called house hacking and burring before house hacking and burring were words or ever existed. Again, met a guy that was a young real estate agent trying to focus on 2 to 4 unit properties. Walk me through the numbers. This is before Bigger Pockets. This is before you could go on YouTube and figure out how to do this stuff, right? Back of your hand. And we just kind of figured it out and had a lot of success there. And then the Navy sent me to Pensacola, Florida, which was not my dream. I thought I was going to stay in San Diego. I thought I was going to buy a couple more fourplexes, retire there, 50 something and live the life. And instead my butt packed up after deployment, actually left deployment a little bit early, showed up at Pensacola, Florida. And I was like, well, what am I going to do here? Right. There are no fourplexes to buy in Pensacola. So I've always been kind of a fan of trying to find the stuff that's hard and nobody else wants to do. Saw these things called mobile home parks. And every time I said it, people would scrunch their nose. You know that little they get a little crease on their nose, right? When they raise their nose at you. I'm like, I feel like that crease probably means like I get another cap, like another percentage on the cap rate. Like anytime somebody goes, like that's probably something I want to do. And so I've kind of zeroed in on trying to do stuff that's hard, that's not easily repeatable, that people don't know how to do. Unfortunately, everything I've done seems to be people have figured it out right behind me, and it's much easier the second time. But so I started getting mobile home parks. In fact, I was trying to buy a mobile home park in Pensacola. I don't know, 25, 26, 27 at the time, somewhere around there. Just a brand new instructor too. I got a buddy that says, hey, I know this other guy. He's buying mobile home parks. You should give him a call. So I give the guy a call. Well, come to find out, he's trying to bid on the same mobile home park I am the next day. We're talking. Come to find out, he's also a flight instructor. He lives a block and a half from me. We go to church together. Didn't even know it. And had like all these like weird connections. And I remember just saying that call. I was like, dude, like, let's not bid against each other. Let's just figure out the price and like one of us pay it kind of thing. Like this seems dumb for us to like run up on each other like this. And so that ended up being a conversation that turned into a friendship, that turned into a partnership. And so I met my partner, Bob. He was a Marine V-22 guy. And so we started doing syndications again in 2014 before syndications were like a thing that people were talking about all the time. Mm-hmm. So we started on a mobile home park. The guy died 2 days before closing. And we ended up going through 9 months of probate and learned in that process people would give us money and there was a good business deal here. And, that kind of launched us off into being commercial real estate guys. So by 2015, had done my first syndication, had never flipped a house, had never owned a single family rental. And even before I actually bought a house in Pensacola, I had like 30 something units and I was rocking and rolling. So decided I wanted to skip the easy stuff, quote unquote, which don't skip the easy stuff. Sometimes it's really profitable. Did a little bit of wholesaling, but nothing that was, serious. Yeah. And then started buying about 2 commercial real estate deals a year. Got real fortunate and was extended and was able to finish out my active duty time in Pensacola. So that kind of extended me in the area. Met some people like Bill Allen, met Bob, met a whole bunch of other guys that are kind of in the space that, Pensacola is like a real narrowing down of, military guys, especially Navy and Marine Corps. And so just a lot of good connections there. And started buying some commercial real estate and became a thing. And then a couple years ago, I launched Climb Capital. We wanted to buy commercial real estate and also buy businesses. And so I ended up meeting a guy trying to sell him on a real estate deal that was the founder of Velocity. We started talking to him. That turned into a very long and twisted ordeal that ended up with us having some small investment into it and me buying a job as an executive and growing that company the last 3 years to about 5x. So just keep bumbling into good deals and hard things and yeah.
Well, what I love about your story is that you don't chase the easy stuff that everybody's already doing. And so you get in, like you got on mobile home parks. Now everybody and their mother is doing mobile home parks. They're trying to do mobile home parks. And I'm sure, I don't do them, it's not my thing. I'm sure they're not as juicy as they used to be, right? They've got everybody else buying them up, competing on them, right? So what I'm most curious about your story is you bought a mobile home park while you were active duty in the military, right?
Yeah, quite a few.
Where did the idea come from first of, hey, I'm going to do that? Because, before, when everybody's talking about them, it sounds like, oh, yeah, it's a no-brainer. They've got pads. They've got the space rent. Like you collect on that. You can owner finance the actual mobile homes themselves. Sounds like a no-brainer. But like you said, when you start thinking about it right at the beginning, you're like, mobile, you mean trailer parks where all the poor people live? So what attracted you to that?
Let's go back to 2007, right? So, I invest all this money as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old into the stock market and I lose it all, right?
Yeah.
And my entire, next 3 or 4 years, I'm paying this money off every month, right? So there's nothing like having to pay another $1,000 a month, right? And you're making $45,000 a year salary. To remind you that you're an idiot, right? And your wife, new wife to also every come day, like stop looking at Google Finance and just shut up, right? Like, just, pay it off, right? So, that'll happen. And you talk about the best thing that ever happened to me was losing 55 grand, right? As a 23-year-old, because it changes the way you think, right? And so my entire focus has been on, defensible, Class C, things that aren't going away. Let's meet needs. Let's find ways to add value. Let's find ways that are, almost guarantees, right? To make money. I don't need to be an entrepreneur that starts something brand new and changes the world with some tech. Like I just need to find something that kind of sucks and make it a little bit better, right? Or even better, find something that's good and make it a lot better, right? Like that just kind of became my game. And so I think that a little bit of training. And then quite honestly, the thing I love is when people are like, yeah, that doesn't seem like a good idea. It's like, well, I'll show you. And so there's a little bit of that, like, chip on the shoulder. I think there's a lot of analysis paralysis, right? People can talk for a long time, but when you just start making phone calls and like one foot after the other, all of a sudden, what was a good idea in January 2014 all of a sudden becomes an actual mobile home park by the summer if you just kind of keep plotting along. So listen, the other thing that helps, having some money, right? Like everybody wants to buy all this stuff and they have no cash. Like, I bought the fourplex in 2010. It was making me a bunch of cash. My wife was working. We weren't spending it. I'd paid off the loan by that point. I'd gotten promoted at that point. So I was making a lot more money. Didn't have any kids. So now I got some money in my pocket. It's real easy to buy a mobile home park when you got some cash too. So that's really helped.
Yeah. And I love what you mentioned about the loss. Like having a big loss early actually helps you out. So, I had Dave on actually last week, and we were talking about some of the investments that we have, the hotel, the apartments that we've got into. And for me, I got into flipping at the best time ever. So I thought I was the shit. I thought I was the best thing ever since sliced bread because I started buying flips in 2020. And so we were buying them, for like just under market value, putting the repairs in to get them at market value. And the only reason we were making any money is because the properties were going up 10% from the time we bought it till the time we closed. So we're like, yeah, we're crushing it. Just buy them. And the sellers were obviously selling them because we're basically buying them at market value. And that was all really good until the market turned. And so as a company, we lost about 800 grand throughout our own flips, and we had private money. We were over leveraged, all of that stuff. And a lot of times it's easy to look back and go, I was an idiot. I should never have done that. But then you think about the lessons that you learn from just taking action, and it changes the way that your mind perceives investing for sure. Because you start looking at the security aspect where it's easy to read Grant Cardone's like, go balls to the wall, 10x is easier than 1x, right? and just think that it's always going to work out. But when you have a little bit of a burn, that scar helps you. It helps you in a good way, right? Because it's like everything from
55 grand as a 23-year-old sucks. But it probably saved me from losing, 500 grand or $5 million as a 60-year-old trying to go day trade or do something else stupid in the future, thinking I'm still smarter than everybody else.
100%. My coach said the same thing. I was getting going through like a personal development coach at the same time. And I remember talking to him about this and then thinking it was the end of the world, which it felt like it. And,
Sure.
55 grand when you're making 45 grand a year feels like it is the end of the world. You're like, this is it. I messed it up. Right. Like, so I just lost my entire year's salary. I'm never going to recover from this. But he said something that really resonated with me, which is it's better that this happened on $1 million deal than it happening later down the line on a $100 million deal, right? Yep. And it seems like you've taken that and you've really put that into every aspect of business from going forward. So then you got into apartment complexes after that. Now, going into some mobile homes, how many did you actually buy while you're in the military?
Man, I've done a really poor job of keeping track of my numbers. Bob and I, that first one that we bought in 2014, 2015 was, I think 16 units when we bought it. And then we expanded it up to 23 units when we sold it, actually just a couple months ago.
Okay.
We bought it for just under 200K, I think 197, and we just sold it for like 850. So it's a good play. We were able to refinance it a few years ago, take some money out and reinvest that too. I owned that one. And then we started syndicating deals. And I started investing passively in deals too. So I don't know, I probably had, before I got out in 2017, it was probably around 100 units, 100 plus units.
While you were in. So were you raising money at the time or were you just saving everything? You were raising money.
Yeah. So we bought that first deal ourselves and we went and got some training together. I'd done a mobile home park, the Mobile Home Park University. See those guys around sometimes. I did that back in like 2014. And then Bob had paid for some training through a group. And he had signed up while he was on deployment, and they gave him an extension. And so when he finally got to shore tour, right, he was supposed to go or he was going to lose access to it. He was supposed to take his wife, and his wife like, I have no desire to take your new boyfriend, Jeremy. And so we went to a class on commercial real estate and learned about this thing called syndication and basically just copied everything that this lady told us and went out and raised 200K on that first deal and, learned all kinds of things about investor psychology and opportunity and just, leverage. And then, raising 200K is a lot of money for some people, but also it wasn't like overcomable. We could survive there. And so, just have been slowly able to chip away at bigger and bigger deals as we've gone. And quite honestly, I'd say I've ran into new opportunities a lot, but I've probably never sat on the opportunities I had enough. And so I'm like, man, if I would have done any of the things I did early enough, if I would have stayed and double down, triple down on some of them, I'd probably be way better off. But instead I have a great story and maybe not as much money.
Well, I love it. And so, raising money in the military, you just took a loan out like a couple of years earlier. You took a loan out and then you lost it. Were you wary to go and then borrow money from, I don't know, strangers, friends and family and things like that? Or at that point you built your confidence up?
No, I mean, I think at the time the deal was a slam dunk, right? So first off, lost the money 2007, 2008, but then immediately started getting smart, read Bogle Guides, the Boglehead's Guide to Investing, which was a bunch of guys are big fans of Vanguard and just kind of low cost index fund investing. Found Dave Ramsey, right? Went down that path and hole for a long time, got, all my personal debt paid off and was just dumping cash, right? We were living super, super inexpensively. So we were dumping cash into the market. So, I was probably putting in 2009, by the time 2009, 2010, paid off the loan, made a lieutenant, which, those two things alone added, $2,000 a month. My wife got a job at the same time. That's another $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Like we were dumping lots of money. So we had seen a massive rise in our net worth. And I'd been able to invest passively in a few deals. And so I started my syndication career actually investing in 3 or 4 other deals, which allowed me to see the process at the same time I was getting ready to launch our own. So I literally was stealing, if they were sending me investor communications and I liked it, man, it went into my file on Google Drive. And when I was ready for me to send out a communication, mine looked a lot like theirs. Right.
Yeah.
And if they did something I didn't like, I was like, I don't want that. I don't want to do that either. Let's do something different. Right. And so by the time we got to raise that first money, the deal was really simple. It was a 74 unit mobile home park. The tenants, were not paying for their own water and they were a little bit under market on their rates, but it wasn't crazy. And we had found a company that would put in water meters and charge the water back to the customer or back to the individuals. It was going to cost us $35,000, but it was going to subtract a $50,000 a year bill, right, to the ownership. And at the time, we were buying it on a 10 cap. So I'm buying this property at $800K. I'm going to insert some water meters in the first month. Not going to raise rents, going to clean the place up a little bit, change out signage, update some stuff. Tenants are going to have a nicer place to live. They're just going to have to pay for their water, which will also decrease usage. So I got a little bit of green thumb, right? I'm going to help the world. And I'm going to make $500,000 in value, right, overnight. Yeah. So it's not hard. At that time, it was like, this seems pretty straightforward. Like, how do you lose? So I wasn't scared maybe in that sense. Now I will say I've continued to push, right? And listen, we haven't probably done about 20 something deals now. I've gone full cycle on probably 15 of them. There's a few one that basically was flat. Everybody got their money back. That's it. We have a deal right now that'll probably have a capital call, right?
Yeah.
Bad loan, right? In 2021, insurance rates tripled, right? Like I'm now at the point where I'm on the other side and I have made some money. And now the question is, okay, do I need to keep pushing to try to grow? Or now do I want to start thinking about pulling back to just not lose, right? And so I think it's kind of a natural sine wave. Like when I was not yet 30, I was willing to kind of take some risks that maybe I'm not ready to take now as I'm turning 40. So
100%. And then going into Climb Capital, I've heard a lot about Climb from
good, bad, and different.
No, actually good things because mostly people reaching out and being like, dude, you got to get on this deal. And I've always stayed away from syndications for whatever reason, but I've heard a lot about Climb. You guys got pretty big pretty quickly from what I understand. So can you walk me through like from starting, what did it look like at the beginning? And then how did you scale it? Because scaling a syndication business doesn't sound easy at all. You have to really know your stuff. You have to have a good operator running the complexes, running the numbers. You really need to be good. And so what did that look like from the very beginning all the way to scaling it? And you still are an owner, right? You guys are still running. Still
operating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Climb Capital started in 2020, right? But Climb Capital really started in 2014 when I met Bob in that first mobile home park. And so we did our first deal together in 2014, October 2014 on that mobile home park. And on that deal, the owner that we were buying from was sick. And that's why he was selling the park. He wasn't taking care of it. His kids didn't want it. His wife was tired of it, blah, blah, blah. Well, he dies 2 days before closing and the property goes into probate, which we were told it was into trust and we were going to have to do that, but people don't always tell the truth, right? Yeah. And so we learned all about probate. We learned about attorneys. We had $50,000, $60,000 in fees to the bank and to the lawyers, right? And then the lawyer that took it in probate ended up just giving it back to the bank because he didn't want to do any work, right? He's like, oh, this is easy. I'll just give it back to the bank. We don't have to do anything. And, just trashed our entire contract. So that wasn't ideal. But that forced Bob and I from the beginning to be operators and to be intimately involved in the process. And so then in 2015, right, we do 2 deals. And then in 2016, we do 2 deals. In 2017, we do 2 deals. And so we're doing all these JVs, learning our chops. We don't bring in a bunch of other people to raise. Nobody comes in to raise any other money. It's just Bob and I raising the money. It's Bob and I operating the deals. It's Bob and I learning property management from the ground up. We were able to kind of learn all the skill sets. And so by 2019, we had this problem, which is Jeremy and Bob saw Jeremy and Bob as Jeremy and Bob, 2 separate entities completely. Everybody in Pensacola, kind of all of our friends, all these deals we had done had been JVs. Everybody else saw Jeremy and Bob as a partnership. And so we had to have a little come to Jesus meeting like, what are we doing, man? Are we partners? Are we we're going to go our separate ways. Like, what does this look like going forward? And so came together, we applied EOS, started meeting every week, put together the VTO, had level 10s, started plotting and planning, thinking a little bit about the future, actually executing, holding each other accountable to getting stuff done. And we went in that first year in 2020, about 500 units, brought on our first employee. Our first employee actually found us and told us we needed to hire her. And we were like, I guess we can't tell her no, right?
It's a good problem.
And that kind of kicked it off, right? And then, COVID happens. We've got all these buddies of ours that have gone into the airlines that are now, freaking out. They don't have jobs. They've all been furloughed. So we had 3 or 4 guys who were working for us for free as interns that were, 30-year-old, pilots at Delta. So we had all this free labor. So, it was just one of those things where good timing, good people. And Bob and I had enough experience to not necessarily need to cut the line, right? I think a lot of people jump into syndications as a money raiser. Or they try to partner with a bigger group, or they try to take a little part piece of it. We just did it all ourselves. And so kind of understood the process. Bob was the gas pedal. He'd buy everything. Jeremy was the brake. I would tell him to stop once in a while.
Okay.
I would make things make money. Bob would find things that made money. If I didn't have Bob, I wouldn't have nothing to make money with. If Bob didn't have Jeremy, he probably wouldn't know how to make money on some of those deals early on, right? And so we just found our way through it. I think it's that, it's a rare story, man. I haven't met a lot of other guys that have been like us that have just kind of started from the bottom and continued to climb on the top. I don't know if it's the best way to do it financially. I probably could have jumped the ladder and joined a bigger group and made more. But I think from a operations, from a business, from like a long-term defensibility and understanding the process, I'm an overnight success in 2020 after working for 6 or 7 years at it. So.
It always happens that way. For those that haven't read Traction, they don't know what EOS is. Can you kind of walk us through what did EOS do for your business exactly, and how did it help you scale so quickly?
So Traction is a book by Gino Wickman. He's a consultant. And basically it's the idea of taking the chaos of entrepreneurship and putting a system on it so that you use the same words, you have the same process, you meet the same time each week, and you can actually start building a little bit of traction in your business, right? And he breaks it down into a people component. There's different components, right? 6 components. I think about it a lot like when I got married, right? I get married. My wife is, she's coming in with money. I'm coming in with all this debt. So that was a great way to start. But I had gotten deep down the personal finance hole already. I was reading all these books. I understood where I screwed up and I wasn't going to do it again. I had all these crazy ideas of how I was going to, get out of the hole. But it didn't matter what Jeremy thought because I'm the husband, right? And so what we did is we went and took one of those Dave Ramsey personal finance classes, right? We went to Financial Peace. And all of a sudden, Dave says the same thing Jeremy says, but because Dave says it, right, we're using Dave's plan, right? It works, right? So it's the same thing like in a marriage, right? Like whatever I say doesn't matter. We go find a third party that validates. We're going to go do it there. EOS, and that, in my view, is basically that third party validation for how to run a business. Even if sometimes it doesn't make sense or it's a little bit, it's a little burdensome. It doesn't really correctly apply to a syndication company. It doesn't matter, right? We're going to stick to the principles. We're all going to be focused on the same thing. We're going to use the same vocabulary to solve these problems. And I think that's really what allows it to kind of work, right? And then from there, we start pulling out the parts and pieces, and the business now seems not like a massive mess. It's like a pizza pie. And so, okay, let me take this slice, which is people. Okay, we got to figure out how to hire. Well, let's go read a book on hiring. Let's just copy everything that book says and do that, right? And so it was literally just kind of that systematic breakdown of the business that really allowed us to kind of see the problems, solve the problem, hold each other accountable, get stuff done, and just keep moving forward. And, the other thing too, right, is time. Like we all have the same 168 hours a week. You got a full-time job. I do too, right? But what are you doing for the other 40 hours when you're not sleeping, right? And so for us, it was like, hey, we go work in the morning super early. We'd get off. We start working, right? We'd work, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And honestly, when you have more going on, you can get more done because you don't have the waste, right? And so I think that was just it'll be a time I'll look back on my life and always kind of really like. I didn't have any kids yet. It was pre-COVID. Life was pretty easy. Had a steady paycheck. Was flying all the time. Like it was a good time. I had a lot of success pretty early on.
Did you guys hire a consultant or did you kind of figure it out by yourself?
Self-implemented. In fact, I took EOS again, self-implemented, not maybe as well as I wanted to at Velocity. And I like to say that everybody I know that has a nicer airplane than me uses EOS. So I've bought some nice airplanes now. So I guess other people can say that about me too. So I mean, do I think it's perfect? Absolutely not. But do I think it's better than nothing? And I think most people don't have a plan. It gives you the plan. So
100%. The reason I ask is it took me probably 2 years, maybe 3 from the time that I first heard about EOS and tried to implement it to where it actually started to work. And what I mean by that, and this is probably, this is on me, but we would do the L10s and we would go over our big metrics and who's responsible for them. But there was a huge lack of accountability and a huge lack of clarity. And it wasn't until just a ton of reps of, okay, if we want to increase our lead to contacted lead, this person's responsible, but exactly how are we going to do this? And are we checking on the plan? And then the more important question is, are we holding each other accountable? Because I find you guys sound like you had a really good partnership. I find in a lot of partnerships, that's one of the biggest things that people lack is the accountability piece, because you're like, your partners are kind of like your friend, but they're also kind of like your wife, because you end up spending more time with them than your actual wife, and it becomes hard to have the accountability conversation. And that piece personally took me a really long time to figure out, which is.
So let me tell you about something that I think is really important. One of the things I find to be the most frustrating thing working with other people or having bosses is when you get tasked without explanation, right? Mm-hmm. You got to go do this, right? The whole message to Garcia idea in the Navy, right? Just message to Garcia, figure it out, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in that, and having the capacity to be able to do that is good. But the level 10, the thing I like about it, it's the matching of, hey, you're accountable, you got a scorecard, but then we also have this IDS, right? It's this identify, discuss, and solve time where you're actually having to come together to try to figure out how to solve the problem. You're not just being thrown on the island and say, hey, well, it's your problem to figure out leads. Well, but I don't know how to do that, right? Like, you've got to be part of the process. Like, everybody's part of the process to solve the problem, right? It's that adage, two heads are better than one. Well, a lot of businesses, you have a bunch of heads, but nobody's using anything but their own to solve any single problem. And so I think that's probably been the thing that's been most helpful. And, I think the other thing too, right, is you got to have quality people, right? Like, quality people matter. It's super, super beneficial when, Bob and I are very aligned in the way we think, kind of the way that we have a lot of things, man. I mean, we taught a Sunday school class together too, right? I mean, that's a pretty deep, ability to hang out, right? As friends, as business partners, and as, co-teachers of a new Sunday school class. So get super fortunate, right? And doing that as naval aviators too, it's not like we've jumped through some hoops to get there at that point too. So maybe it's not for everybody, but I think that EOS for me was definitely one of the cores, along with good people, and really being able to attract good people early on at Climb that made all the difference. So
and I really want to dive into that, and I don't want to just use the excuse that all the pilots got laid off, because you definitely did something to attract some good talent. Before we dive into just because you've had to be able to do that to scale the two companies that you've scaled, you've had to be able to get really good talent. One of the things I'd love to point out, whenever I meet or I speak to really good CEOs or operators, like, you kind of come off as a really dialed in operator. One of the things I hear over and over is, hey, I actually learned the ins and outs of it first. I didn't just go try to hire everything. And there's a guy named Vaughn Bethel that was on the podcast a couple of months ago. And we were talking about like the who versus how method versus like the E-Myth method. And I like to think of them as opposites. Who versus how is like, I don't need to know how to do that at all. I just need to go find somebody. And then there's like the E-Myth method, which is like, I don't care who's in this seat. As long as we get the right person, they have documentation to follow a process. And what I've really loved to watch really good operators do is they learn the process, they build out SOPs, and then once they have SOPs, then they go hire the right people to come in and improve them and make them better, right? But they give them something, and they do have a baseline understanding of how things should look, right? So that way, if something goes way off the rails, you're not just completely clueless. And I think that's one thing that I see people, especially like you've got those guys that are like, I'm a visionary, and they just don't like to work. They're visionaries, AKA they don't like working, right? So they want to hire everybody else.
How can I find my COO? How can I find my number two? Bro, you can go to work. Is what you can do. Yeah, you work 10 hours a week.
And they don't want to work for somebody. Like, ideas are cheap, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I've always noticed about people that are successful and running good businesses is they always build out some sort of, they have a baseline understanding of everything, every department in the business. They build out some sort of process. They at least spend time thinking about it, and they don't just go try to find everyone else to do the work for them. They're working, and A players like that. The A players want to work for other A players. If I was out at the beach every single day, nobody on my team would personally want to work for me, right? Like they just wouldn't. They all tell me why they want to work here. And it's because I'm pouring into them equally as much as they're pouring back into the company. And so that's a good transition. I'd love to hear kind of your story about how you're able to attract really good talent. And then most importantly, how do you keep them?
So it really helps if people think that you're cool and they like you. So I always start with like being a good dude gets me in a lot of good places, right? And I think having just a little bit of professional curiosity and personal curiosity on people and like just generally caring, right? It's sometimes is a rarity. For Bob and I, we did a couple things. One is we had a couple of years where we were working together. We have a cool story, good guys. I think we're trying to do the right thing. We're treating people right. So we have a little bit of success. So as Climb launches, people already know our success and they want to be a part of a success. They see us as, hey, these guys are going someplace. Let me jump on. So that was number one. Number two, one of the very first things we did with Climb is we designed, because we've been working together at this point. It wasn't like it was a waste. We designed, hey, what does Climb look like? What does Climb sound like, right? We got a brand guide. We went and shot like about us videos. We created our own cultural statements. We had the BTO. We had, we still have these things, right? Core values. And so we based our entire plan around this core value, around where we were trying to go. And I think when people like who you are and they know where you want to go, it's very easy for them to join the team. When you're just like a spastic case and like I'm all over the place all the time, I'm a visionary, just come figure it out for me. Like, no, nobody wants to do that, right? And then it certainly helps when you're in something like finance and you have a company that's called Climb Capital. And our very first employee basically came out of commercial real estate. She was working at a brokerage office. Married a naval aviator or a student naval aviator at the time, moved to Pensacola. And she said that she looked on LinkedIn for anybody that had a capital company or some kind of real estate company. And we were the ones she found. So she called us up and said, you need to interview me. And so we interviewed her. She's like, you should hire me. And we're like, well, we don't have any money. She's like, yeah, you'll figure it out. And so we did, right?
Interesting.
And then from there, right, it was just kind of collecting other people that wanted to know more about what we were doing, finding places for them, and then bring them in, right? That first year in 2020, after we launched during COVID, we did an offsite and brought in all the guys that were kind of working with us on a part-time basis that were airline pilots. They were part of our, annual retreat to talk about Climb and what the future looked like. And, one of those guys is still here today with us, right? And so, it's just cool to like have a club that people can join and give them a little bit of a place and a piece of it and let them go. And then also just, it really helps to be blessed and not hire a bunch of, not nice words, right? People that aren't going to work out is how it's
people that will come after you the second something doesn't go in their way. You definitely, and you've attracted some really good people, and I think good people do attract good people. So that says a lot about you guys. Now, let's take a turn and go into the restoration business at Velocity Restorations. You jumped in, they're doing 20, 25 trucks a year, you said roughly?
Yeah, so let's go back. So January 21, Bob and I are trying to find some investors for another mobile home park deal, about an 80-something unit mobile home park deal. And Stuart, who's the founder, his brother and him had been doing some real estate deals, but he had gotten too busy at Velocity because he was the only manager, we found out later, to be able to do his own deals. And so he was looking for somebody he could invest with. And so he invited us out to his shop and said, hey, I'm interested in kind of hearing about this deal. Maybe there's a way that you guys can do some real estate. I want to be a part of real estate. I like real estate. He'd had a pretty successful real estate past himself, but he was, pretty inundated with the day-to-day of restoring trucks. So we go meet him. And, in this conversation, we're talking about our business, but then we're just really interested. He gives us a tour of the place, meet some of the other guys there. And he's very frustrated because he sees Bob and I have this pretty easy partnership, and him and his partner at the time are just seeing different ways of way the business needs to keep going. He sees the opportunity to grow. The business partner was really okay with like, hey, let's just be very safe and secure. Let's just build a couple trucks. Like we don't need to overextend ourselves. We've got a good thing here. And, they were making good money. And so we just made this offhanded comment like, hey, man, if you ever want to sell this place, we'll buy it. Like acting like we know what we're talking about, right? So he called a couple weeks later. He's like, are you guys serious? We're like, oh, yeah, we're absolutely serious. Truth is we had no business doing it. But we went again, right? It was just like our first syndication. We don't know how to do this, but we know some guys. We know some people. Let's just try to figure it out. So we partnered with another small private equity company in town that had only bought one other business. We did the whole quality of earnings statement, right? So they did the financial due diligence. And then we started out trying to go find money. I'll be very honest, we didn't find that money. It's 2021, and nobody wanted to give us a whole bunch of cash for the blue sky of a business that didn't have hard assets and had a very short track record of making the money it was. which was frustrating. And, we also had this whole negotiation with Stuart, but we also needed to partner with Stuart. We couldn't find the cash. He needed out of the partnership at some point as we were continuing to kind of think about the future and ways that we can make this grow, and came up with a business plan. And he was running with the business plan, and we hadn't bought the business, and we're like, oh crap, this is going to be expensive. And it was. So the price went up significantly, but he was able to parlay the offer that we made to him to buy out his partner. Hey, one of us has got to go. One of us has got to stay. So that launched in 2022. I wish I maybe had a bigger part of the pie at the end, but I got a little piece of the action. And then part of that deal was I agreed to basically stay on and help him out for the first 6 months just to transition to new ownership.
Yeah.
And what was supposed to be 6 months has been 2.5 years. Got a turn at the CEO last year. I've learned a ton. We've grown the business a ton. We have done a lot of Googling and a lot of ChatGPT to try to figure out how to run a business of size and scope. We've not made all the right answers, but we've continued to, just continue to push. And we took a business that was, they did about 25 trucks in 2020, 44 trucks in 21. We did about 80 trucks in 22. And then last year, 23, we did about 100 to 104, depending how you want to break it down. We did about 125 this year. And become the largest restorer of classic trucks in the country, and created a brand new market for super high-end turnkey restored vehicles.
It's such a niche. It's such a niche market. How do you go about? So like, you're looking at this. When you were looking at your mobile home park, you saw a very clear path to, I could start charging the tenants the water. I could do a little bit of maintenance. We could slowly increase the rents, and that's it. How did you look at a business? Like it's not like you were in restorations before. You were in apartment complexes, which is very, very different. How did you look at this and go, I can scale this business? And then what were the first couple of things that you started to do other than just implementing EOS and kind of, hiring good people? Like, what was it that you did that moved the needle?
Yeah. So the thing that attracted Bob and I to Velocity was Stuart had already come up with an idea of changing how restorations were done. So instead of doing a one-off custom, let's build this like a track house, or let's build this like an assembly line. And so we'll put the vehicle in station 1, week 1, and we'll have every single week broken down into what's going to happen with it. And we'll know at the end how many hours and how much cost is each of these vehicles, which allows us to price the vehicle at a fixed price and give a fixed timeline and solve a really big problem in the restoration industry, which is the unknowns, right? If you want to go get a car restored right now, you have to go find the car, hope it's not a complete beater. Then you got to find a restoration company. Then you got to hope and pray that they can get you in the next 3 years, because the truth is they probably can't. And then you're now on the hook for the entire process, whether that's finding problems in rust when they actually start getting into the metal, when they can't find parts, when they got guys who are doing poor work. Like, you're paying a time and materials contract that whole time. And so you're this labor of love that you're hoping you're going to get this car back could become a 4 or 5 year ordeal. Your budget could double or triple. And typically your car at that point is worth about a third of whatever you've put into it. And so that's kind of like a crap, business model.
Yeah.
But people do it all the time. So this idea of hey, let's figure out a way to streamline this, take out some of the options. Stuart had already started running, and we're like, I think this works. Let's just do it. And so we did, and continue to have a lot of success. And also, again, man, sustained superior timing. Post-COVID, people had money and they wanted to spend it. And by building the way we did, we had inventory that we could constantly be selling. People didn't have to wait a year for stuff, and allowed us to really grow really, really fast. And then we saw opportunity, so we just didn't stop. And we're not stopping. It's really the short answer.
Do they still get to customize the vehicle the exact way they want to? Or is it, hey, these are our vehicles, this is our stock we have, and you get to pick one up?
So we build select models that we have chosen and that we've kind of basically mastered. The customer can pick colors, interior, and some options, but Velocity chooses the best drivetrain, transmissions, suspensions, components. So you don't have to make the hundreds of decisions and hope and pray, right, that it's correct at the end, because we've already done the hard work, already built it, taken apart, tested it, put hundreds of miles on it. So we know it works. It's not a question of it's going to work. It's just, you're going to get a truck that you're going to love and it's going to operate.
Yeah.
So it's still custom, right? It's still your truck,
right?
But you don't have to make some of the custom decisions that at the end of the day, do you really care about the types of springs that you have, right? On your suspension? Does that matter to you that much, right? Are you worried about your PCM, or do you just want us to go figure out which one we can tune?
Yeah.
That's where it kind of ends up.
And did you guys feel like there was a risk of, hey, we could do this and people don't want, maybe they want to customize it their exact way? Or did you know, like, I don't know, maybe you did some market research before that people are just waiting for these things. And so we could scale it as fast as we could make them.
In 2021, when we met Stuart and the team, they were still doing custom restoration. So you could bring your own vehicle in and you could do whatever you wanted, right? We'd do whatever you wanted. There is no budget. I mean, the contract was very explicit. There is no budget. This is a time material contract. Whatever it costs in materials plus whatever it costs in time, that's what you pay. In 2022, we stopped taking partial builds, right? So if you wanted to come in and just have us do a little bit of work, the margin wasn't in it. It's really hard work. It's hard to schedule. They're never really that happy because they want a cheap price. We want a high quality product. It's just, it doesn't work. By the end of 22, we started looking around and we had all these customs and it was about 10% of our revenue, but it was 40% of the shop space and it was 90% of my customer complaints. And so it became really easy to be like, you know what? It was additions by subtraction. We got rid of the custom builds, finished a few off, sent a few out of their shops, canceled a few. That was not without its own, complexities. But it allowed us to free up kind of the entire shop space to, hey, we are building production vehicles at scale. We're not going to build one and then be done. If we build one, we expect to build 50, right? And so when you're designing a vehicle, it's completely different, right? When the interior guy's building that interior, he knows this is going to go on, 50 vehicles. It's not just like jerry rig and hope and pray. Like, no, we're going to have to do this every week. So like, make sure this is right? The guys are putting together the suspension, the guys in parts, right? They got to make sure they can buy parts continually and not have to hope and pray then go get it out of a junkyard one at a time. Yeah. So it just completely changed the mentality, but that allowed us to kind of have this push. And then, it's kind of much like you're a house flipper, right? Like I believe society, we've come to want the turnkey done for me. I just want to pay and go. And so the same thing followed the restoration industry. There's a lot of guys who are fans, but they don't have the time, attention, or tools to go out and do the work themselves. And so we fill that gap for those who want the very best.
And did Stuart have those numbers already as far like the numbers that you just spit off with the workspace, the number of complaints, and then their actual customer satisfaction? Did he have that before you guys jumped in, or was that something that you guys, when you were in due diligence to buy the business, you saw that opportunity and then you ran with it?
We knew from the beginning of due diligence that was the way it was moving.
Yeah.
But let's not lie to ourselves. That custom work, man, that's a mighty high margin, right? And like that's the higher margin actually than the stuff we were doing for the signature series builds. But margin's not everything, right? And so it was the complexity of trying to handle that got us to dig into those numbers to figure that out at the end of 22, beginning of 23. It wasn't something we knew going in that we just totally get rid of the customs.
Right. Because if you have, huge margin, 40% margin, but you can only do 5 a year versus maybe cut it down to 30, but you could easily do 40 a year. That's a better business model. And that's what 100%. You guys identified.
Right. Like I'm paying a guy $30 an hour, but I'm charging the customer $105 an hour. That sounds like it's awesome. But I now have to have a guy in parts that is smart enough to go figure out every single part individually for every single custom and ensure it gets there on time. It ain't going to happen. Oh, by the way, when those parts get there, what we thought we were going to get, what we thought was going to isn't going to happen. So it's just, you're constantly fighting these problems that make it much harder. It makes you need a much higher level skill, which means you can't scale, right? Like you can only do so many because there's only so guys in the room that have the ability to kind of pull all this stuff together. When I build it on an assembly line and I break it down and say, hey, welder, you have to weld the same thing every week. I don't need a guy that can weld the entire car, right, with his eyes closed backwards and forwards. I need a guy that can weld the same thing every single week, right? And so it made the entire process of scaling much, much better than trying to customize and have, crazy high-end labor that also are prima donnas and are never happy and think they can do it better than us. No, man. Like we figured out what works. I don't want you to create your own process. I want you to follow our process so we know that it's the same every single time.
I love that. And it sounds like you've done a really good job of just streamlining the business, cutting out the complexities. And that's the biggest thing that's helped you guys get from, I think you said 25 and now you're on track to do 125. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah.
Man, that's incredible. What are some of the biggest lessons that you learned from getting into, apartment complexes to an actual business like that?
So one of the things that Bob and I had to struggle with, and I still struggle with today, is trying to do it all right perfectly from the beginning versus just doing it. Right. And so one of the things that was always a struggle early on is like, hey, we don't fully understand like these tax rules, or we don't fully understand some of this SEC stuff. And like, all of our files aren't perfectly labeled and our emails are all a mess. And like, how are we doing this and how are we doing that? But coming to be comfortable with the idea that you don't need to clean up a mess until you create it. It's something that we learned in real estate that I think really works well in business, which is you're never going to know it all. Like if you're going to wait until you know it all, you're never going to start. And so just start and then let's figure it out and clean it up as we go. It has absolutely worked for us, right? Like I don't know how I'm going to solve tomorrow's problems because I don't know what tomorrow's problems are. But if I wait to learn the problem and how I'm going to solve it, I'll never have tomorrow's problems, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just that idea of like being okay with not being okay, being in the grit, just getting dirty, figuring it out is something that we've learned, especially in Class C multifamily. That's the same thing you have to take into business every day, which is like, we got to fight it out and figure it out and meet good people.
Man, I love it. This has been so good and so valuable. Where can people learn more about you? Like, let's say people want to invest in Climb Capital, or maybe somebody wants to learn more about Velocity Restorations. How can people learn more about you? Where can they go?
Well, first off, you can find Velocity on all of the major social platforms as the marketing guy. So go look us up on Instagram, go give us a follow, check us out on velocityrestorations.com. Go plot and plan when you sell your $100 million business, which truck you're going to buy. I'll be here to help you out when that happens. For Climb Capital, you can find us at climbcapital.com. We're not actively raising money. We have more money than we know what to do with nowadays. It's a good problem when you're operate for a few years. So we're actually much more interested in deals. So if you have RV park deals across the Southeast, we're buyers. And if you want to partner with us on that, we're happy to do that too. And then for me, you can find me on the social media on Instagram, on Facebook. You can hit me up at jeremy@jeremyhands.com, and maybe someday I'll put my website back up as I get ready to launch my next thing. So,
and it's not a light Instagram following. They've got 268,000 followers on just Instagram alone. So shows their social media presence. So whoever's doing the marketing, man.
And I haven't bought any we did not buy any followers, even though maybe I should have. So
no, man, I love it. Awesome, Jeremy. Man, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for coming on. This has really been helpful, and I know everybody's going to get a lot of value. So thanks again, man.
I hope so. Thanks for having me, John.
All right. This is Zeroed In Podcast. We are signing off.